Martin, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey man, you're welcome. Happy to be here. Well, I'm not anywhere. I'm at home.
Well, I've been following you on X for a really long time, and you really caught my attention because we were both in a Twitter space
Yeah.
held by Eva Chipiuk about the Alberta pension plan. I said my little piece, and then you came in and basically steamrolled me and made me basically look like a chimpanzee who knows
Didn't do
how.
it on purpose. Sorry if I wasn't doing it on
No,
purpose. No, no.
no.
Yeah.
I after I listened to you speak, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to talk to this guy because I got to get a little bit more educated about this stuff. I'm a layman in a lot of ways, and whenever I have to speak back to back with people like you, I just walk away feeling like I shouldn't have even opened my mouth. So
No worries. That's why we're here, man. When you reached out, I mean, I'm all about dialogue. I'm all about engaging people. Online, I'm known as Martyupnorth, fact checker, which is and we can get into that. But that's one of the things I like to do. I like to bust narratives, but in a truthful way, like just by bringing out facts is what I do. And then right now the APP is a relevant topic, so of course I'm talking about it. But I think we're going to talk about more than that today.
yeah. So uh I checked out your YouTube channel. You're an outdoorsman,
Yeah.
all around educated guy. What led to your interest, I mean, in fact checking, in politics and things like that?
So my background, let me just for your audience who might not know who I am, I'm a 56-year-old engineer, and I'm from Eastern Canada. So grew up in Ontario and Quebec as a teenager. Went to university, graduated at a time, graduated in 89, 90. Economy was in similar to today in the shits, and then had the opportunity to move out west to start my career. Went way up north, ended up living in a small town called Fox Creek up north, and got my career started there. And so therefore, for me, being an engineer is who I am. I mean, I found my vocation a long time ago. Being an engineer means, I'm interested in facts. I use data, information to solve problems. So it just comes naturally to me, throughout the course of my career. Well, I mean, let's give it a little more context. Throughout the course of my career, I learned that I'd often be presented by a problem. Typically, a problem would come to me from a supervisor or somebody else in an environment where I work. And I learned a long time ago that, make sure you understand the problem, first of all, because people could ask you to solve a problem that's actually not a problem. And so make sure you understand the problem. And the way to understand a problem is to, dig into facts and find information and data. And then the other thing I learned that you don't make decisions without proper data. Make sure your data is in good quality. The other thing I learned along the way is a lot of times instincts, intuition are bad. They can be good. I mean, being guided by your instincts is good, but in the engineering world, there's a lot of times where people would present me with a problem, and once I dug into the facts, I go, ooh, that's not the real problem, and the solution is counterintuitive. Anyway, so digging into information is something I've always done. And for me, it lately on Twitter. Well, back to social media. So Martyupnorth came up as a moniker, 20 years ago. That's how long I've been on social media.
Hmm.
And for me, it was Facebook, like a lot of people. But I also discovered YouTube a long time ago. And on YouTube, I'm known as a guy who does outdoor adventures. But while I'm outdoors, I can't help myself. If I'm in the Rockies and I see a glacier, I'll talk about the glacier. If I see a spider in the middle of winter, I'll talk about the spider, and get people thinking. And then did that for a decade. Still do YouTube, but then got onto Twitter. And on Twitter, that's Twitter is for me is busting narratives, talking politics, talking any subject, and I can't help myself. Like if I see something, almost everything I see, I question. It's just who I am. And then so I never even know how I'm going to start my morning. I get on Twitter and I see something. I go, huh, okay, and then off I go. I'm questioning something.
I
Yeah,
love it, man.
yeah,
Yeah, you've been such an incredible account for myself to follow because, I think we all kind of find ourselves in the same scenario where there's so much information coming at us all the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's difficult to do what you do. It's difficult to sit down and go, okay, how true is this? Like, and especially now, considering how our mainstream and legacy media have been captured by politics and different ideologies. Even there, you don't really can't really use them as a reference point
No.
anymore. So
No.
it's difficult because there are a lot of psyops going on all the time via social media. And it's hard to figure out, like, okay, what do I believe? Like, what is this real? Is this not? I mean, a really good example is these. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, even I get caught into it some days. I go, oof, like I still have a naive optimism about life, and then once in a while you dig into something and you go, holy shit, it's not even what I thought. Or I've actually posted things where I think I'm posting something very factual, and then another fact checker will come and say, Marty, you made a mistake. I'm like, oh shit, yeah.
Yeah. And a good example of that is, with the current conflict and between Israel and Palestine, things that are going down in Gaza. There's videos that flood your news feed of, children in hospitals, people injured people. And then, it's horrifying. You're looking at it, and, as a human being, no matter what your beliefs may be, to see somebody, bleeding out on a hospital bed, or a child, shaking, covered in dirt, it wrenches at your heart, right? But 10 seconds later, you scroll a little bit further, and then comes the big reveal of, somebody who was filming behind the person who was filming on their phone. And the whole thing is just a complete ruse. And to me, it's, that it's stuff like that where it's like, okay, well, I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know. It's almost like our entire world is a fiction.
I'm going to pause you for a second. I'm going to move my camera. Like, the sun was like coming in through my window, and all of a sudden I looked like I had
not a problem. Yeah, I was like, is Marty going to heaven? Are we watching it?
No, sorry to break your thought on that one, but no, you're right. There's lots of memes on that subject of you look at a person helping a kid, but then when you zoom back, it's not a person helping a kid. The guy's actually got his knee on the kid and he's holding the kid down or something like that. I totally.
Right. So dummies like me rely on people like you. And there's been a number of stories that have come out, especially as it pertains to Canadian current events and politics, where I go straight to Martyupnorth, and I'm like, has he looked at this yet? What is he saying about this? Because you've become a very trusted source of information, and you're one of my favorite accounts to follow. So I wanted to start big picture. And this is going to be pretty general, but we're going to work our way inward to the micro. We'll start macro, go to the micro. And so what, in your view, is the current status of Canada as a whole, politically, on the international stage, economically? I mean, can you capture?
I get asked this question a lot, and I say Canada is no longer a serious country. We're not a serious country. I mean, at the turn of the century, Wilfrid Laurier, 100 years ago, pre-World War I, he made the bold prediction that the 20th century would belong to Canada. We had a bit of a coming of age in World War I at Vimy, and then we pulled our, we pulled our own weight in World War II, and then during the 60s, Canada was a country that punched above its weight class and did well, and we were well respected, led by statesmen, but then in the last, well, it accelerated in the last 8 years under Trudeau, but in the last little while, we lost our position as a serious country. We really lost it in the last 4 or 5 years. We lost our position. I mean, that's my high level, fundamental conclusion right now. We're a joke of a country. We're misguided.
So misled. Did this decline begin before Trudeau, or was Trudeau really the marker where it started?
There had been, it started before, for sure. It started in the 90s and the 2000s, but we still had, we still had statesmen who were able to hold it together. I mean, think about Canada. Canada's a bold experiment. It's a very bold experiment. It's a giant, we're like half a continent. I mean, Canada's more enormous than Europe. And it's a bold experiment in the 1860s to unify, different territories, and created this thing called Confederation. And it worked. It worked well for years, but it required some really, really strong statesmen to bring it all together, because you're bringing together very different regions. And I can speak about that because I've lived in across the country, and I've worked across the country. So holding the country together is always a challenge. But then it started failing when governments, when people demanded too much of their governments, or the government gave too much. Like when all the government had to do was hold the country together and make sure that the borders were secure and the courts were working and there was some policing, it was okay. But then when we got into offering benefits and crazy policies and all sorts of things, that's when we realized that there's some huge differences regionally, and then holding the country together at a certain point in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when government became more in our lives and we depended more on governments. Then it became very difficult for the country for the people in power to be statesmen and to hold it together. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, we have a clown at the helm in the terms of Trudeau. He's absolutely not a statesman, and he plays to divide the country because it benefits him, the divide and conquer, and the country is really falling apart right now. And the original flaws that our founders tried to address with the original Constitution of Canada, they don't work now. We're seeing, it's too complicated. So Canada to me is a gong show right now, but pragmatically, it's a failed experiment.
So would you say that that the decline began, the further that we slid into a socialist system?
Yes.
I mean,
that's a good point. That's actually, those are the words I was trying to figure out. As Canada became more socialistic and governments were providing more assistance to the nation and more services, that's when we realized that we have very different needs across the country. So trying to manage an enormous country like us as a socialist state is where Canada's breaking apart.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, very good observation.
It's the problem I've always had with socialism. It's a great idea on paper, right? And it makes sense if you're in a community of 10, 20 people. Same with communism. Sure. It makes sense if you're in a tiny little community where everybody shares and everybody gets along, but everybody has different needs.
Different aging populations out east versus Alberta. One part of the nation wants childcare. The other part of the nation wants parent care. One part of the nation wants assistance with fisheries. The other part of the nation wants assistance with mining. Yeah, it's too complicated to provide everything to everyone simultaneously in this country.
And when you apply socialism to a democracy, it makes it even worse, because now the politicians have to play to the needs of the majority, right? So for example, like what we're seeing right now, Trudeau, I guess he's begun campaigning. I don't know if it's I feel campaigning. I feel like the guy
he officially appointed his campaign managers 2 weeks ago, so he is campaigning.
Okay, so he's begun campaigning, and the slogans are the usual. I mean, now here's the interesting part, because I've watched a few of his speeches, and I feel like he is significantly out of step with the Canadian public this time. I feel like the carbon taxes are a dramatic failure, and for whatever reason,
he's trying to find he has a choice right now whether he finds a unifying cause or a wedge. He's got a dozen wedges that he can use, but that's a shitty strategy. He's running out of unifying causes. I mean, he had marijuana in 2015. He had kind of COVID in 2019, 2021, but right now he's been so divisive in the last little while that he's unable to find a unifying cause. I don't know, and in all his old slogans, Canada's back or build back better or all those things, they're all exhausted. So I'm waiting anxious, or not anxiously, but I'm curious to see what he comes up with a slogan, if he does.
Yeah, I saw him at his most recent speech. There was a slogan on the I don't know what the podium that he's standing in front of. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was like the most nonsensical mishmash of words. It was like climate and homes. And it's like, so that's what you're doing it. And the part that drives me crazy is that their entire home strategy is just basically building housing projects. I mean, let's be honest, that's what they are, right? You're building government rental housing.
And
right?
they're not even going to build them. They're just going to say they are, but they weren't. I mean, yeah, it's a whole other topic. I mean, he landed in California yesterday. He's meeting with the governor of California. And, after the initial chit chat, he immediately went into climate change and a few other platitudes. So he's got nothing right now. He's still hanging on to the climate change narrative, which is one of my favorite narratives to bust apart, which ironically is still one of the narratives that's being censored. I mean, when I was nervous about talking about COVID for the last few years, I'd get censored. I'm not afraid to talk about COVID, but I've realized just in the last few months, no matter what, if I start busting down on the climate change narrative a little too hard, I get throttled and I get shadow banned on media.
So do you feel like we've kind of tapered off on the climate alarmism, or is it just as hot as it ever was?
No, we've tapered off. I mean, that one is the sky is falling narrative. Like, the poor climate alarmists are on year 30 of failed predictions. I think Greta Thunberg went in and started deleting her 2018 and earlier tweets because, her 2018 tweet saying we only have 5 years before everything ends. Like, the changes in the climate are so minute for us here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think there is a little more impact in places that face monsoons and things like that. But I still like to think that humans have a very narrow window of 100 years. And if I look at the big picture, none of the climate predictions have happened. And in fact, I hate to say this, but I'm kind of cheering these two big volcanoes. There's one in Iceland and there's one in Mexico. It's unfortunate for the people of Iceland. I don't wish them I hope everybody makes it out okay, but Mother Nature is about to show us that she controls the climate, and if she wants to put out megatons of carbon and ash in the sky and create a small nuclear winter for 2 months, she'll do it in a heartbeat. So to your original question, the climate narrative's busted. It's they're hanging on dearly to that one, and Canadians aren't buying it.
I don't think anybody is. And I think it's a narcissistic worldview to think that we have really any control over
it's narcissistic, but I do want to expand on this. The narrative on its own is busting apart. But the other thing is, look around you, and Canadians have bigger worries. So when Trudeau lands, so Trudeau is tone deaf, people aren't reading the room. When Trudeau lands in California and starts talking about climate change, people tuned him out instantly, because the reality is, 1 in 7 Canadians is going to the food banks. Interest rates are at 20-year high. Inflation is out of control. There's an opioid epidemic. There's gun crime galore. There's protests. The country's divided. 2 provinces are talking about separation. So Canadians are like, poll any real Canadian, do any real poll of Canadians. Climate change doesn't even make the top 20 on their list. Not even close.
So why does he keep going?
Because he's got nothing else, man. Actually, it's a good question. I asked that question. I honestly asked that question in the last little while. I don't know. At this point, I don't know what Trudeau's end game is or his strategy is. I made a comment that I think he's actually I think he is truly taking direction from higher ups, from whether it's the UN or the World Economic Forum, because nothing he's doing makes sense.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Unless his end game is to, turn Canada into an example of what a post-national state looks like. And boy, he's succeeding if he's trying to do that.
Yeah. So here's my assessment. My assessment of him is this. I don't think he ever wanted to be prime minister. I don't think he ever had designs on entering politics. I think that he was, from what I understand, his brother who passed away was the one who was being groomed to enter politics. And I think that he took on that, he carried that mantle and entered politics to continue the Trudeau legacy, right?
If you look at what he did as a young adult, I would 100% agree. I mean, as a young adult, he went to Brébeuf, the school like everybody else in the elite, and then he buggered off, went to Vancouver, the guy, what does he want to do?
He just wants to surf.
He wants to surf, man. He wants to surf, ski, have a little bit of adoration from the odd person, and that's all he wants. I agree.
Yeah, and so I here's what I think. I think he was sent off to the young global leaders
Yep.
summit or whatever, and where he was groomed. And
Yep.
I think that what he's doing is he's towing the only line that he knows. He's if you remove the agenda that he serves from Trudeau, he's got nothing. Exactly what you said. And
He's not a deep thinker. There's no way he's a deep thinker. I mean, if you know,
no,
if you and I brought him here and sat down around a campfire and said, "Hey, Justin, what's your thoughts on, I don't know, caribou conservation or farmers shifting over to growing whatever bamboo instead of grass," he wouldn't have an opinion. He wouldn't. He'd immediately get into you with platitudes of whatever he's been taught. He's not a deep
exactly.
thinker. He's not a deep thinker.
Exactly. And so that's why he won't pivot to anything else, because
No.
he can't. And that's why when you see him in interviews or giving speeches, it comes off as extremely disingenuous, because all he's doing is he's regurgitating talking points and buzzwords that he's been handed. He doesn't have an original thought as it pertains to politics, right? And that's why, a guy like Pierre Poilievre, whether you agree with his politics or not, he rips them to shreds. I mean, if those two debate like on an actual debate stage for an hour, it's going to be a bloodbath.
Oh, yeah, it would be. Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see a real. I'd love to see that there's a reform. I'd love to see a real House of Commons with a real question period. But that's a dream. I just wanted to. You made me think of, was he groomed for this position? Absolutely. I mean, even Klaus Schwab, the founder of Davos, the World Economic Forum, brags about it, right? He bragged about it like 7-8 years ago, how they had succeeded in he even used the word infiltrating governments, and he was bragging about his getting his hooks into Justin Trudeau, Jacinda Ardern or whatever her name is in New Zealand, Root in Holland and places like that, and they're all gone.
Rishi Sunak in the UK.
Yeah, and they're all gone, right? I mean, the only one who's still there is Trudeau, and it's what are we talking about here?
Climate change. We're talking about, but where I was going with this was the World Economic Forum, because I oscillate between whether to be truly deeply concerned about them, or whether they've been exposed to a degree now where it's common knowledge that they're the supervillain. They're playing the supervillain role in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just depends what side of the bed I wake up on. Yesterday I wrote an essay about the parallels between the Canadian economic situation and what we saw develop and what ultimately caused the collapse in Venezuela. And when I write about that stuff, it freaks me out, because it's like we are going along the same path. However, what as it appears to me that what's happening here in our country is calculated and intentional, and that the people that are pulling the strings, i.e. the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum group, but I personally believe he's just a front man. I think that there are much bigger interests above the World Economic Forum.
Well, and let me tell you why I think it's calculated. When Trudeau, it's back to the way the country is formed in a number of seats in Parliament. Just very pragmatically speaking, right? When Trudeau first got elected in 2015, I went, holy shit. I was scared. Because I'm like, this guy's going to be in power for 20 years because he has the right last name. He can walk a crowd and he can say the right things. And all he had to do was get elected and get the votes in the Maritimes, Ontario, and Quebec. He never even needed any votes in British Columbia. So anything east of Ontario doesn't even need those. And so if he was truly, truly just interested in staying in power as a Canadian for the sake of staying in power, all you'd have to do is just never even come to Alberta, just appease Ontario and Quebec day in and day out, and he'd get elected over and over and over. But the things he's doing in the last 4 or 5 years, to me, are self-destructive, counterintuitive, extremely damaging if you wanted to stay in power. So he obviously doesn't give a shit about staying in power. He's 100% confident that he will stay in power as long as needed, or he's been promised something after this. And he's doing what he's been asked to do, which is to sow division and wreck the country. because he didn't need to do that. No politician before him ever did that. I mean, and people say, Marty, you're a conservative, or I'm like, I'm not a conservative. I will gladly admit that I prospered. The most prosperous period of my adult life was under Chrétien, a liberal, because he mostly catered to the East. He got reelected, 3 times. And what did he do to Alberta? He threw us a couple of peanuts once in a while, kept us happy, but at least he didn't purposely interfere in our lives and try to extinguish us. Whereas when I talk about Trudeau, I talk about it as an Albertan. As an Albertan, I consider Trudeau an existential threat, a real threat. He doesn't like me. He doesn't like me, and I don't understand why. Because he can just ignore me and get elected year after year, but he's purposely setting about to destroy half the country, and I don't know why.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's this Laurentian elitist arrogance that he carries with him, and he's kind of at the core of that, right? Because he's a Trudeau. I mean, he is as close to, I mean, I wouldn't call it royalty, but I mean, he's basically a Kennedy by Canadian standards.
Yeah, he's
right?
Canadian royalty. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that there is, especially because of how hated his father was by the West, I think that there is this anger and animosity toward us. It's almost like a purposeful smack in the face repeatedly over and over and over again, which doesn't make sense to me, because I've heard a lot of debate about this, and maybe you can correct me on this, but as far as I'm aware, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan produce most of the country's wealth, as far as I'm aware. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
they produce a disproportionate amount of wealth. I mean, those 3 provinces, we punch above our weight class. But I do want to go back to what you said. I do agree. For your audience who might not know this, I mean, Pierre Trudeau was Justin Trudeau's father. And he's highly respected and highly thought of across the country, except here in Alberta. So Trudeau's father did something to Alberta in the 1980s that was devastating. He tried to nationalize the energy industry, and he created a policy called the National Energy Policy, which absolutely demolished Alberta. So yes, I think that young Justin Trudeau growing up would have been in a circle where everybody would have said, oh, your father's wonderful. Your father was such an intellectual, the blah, 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 except when he came to Alberta. And when he came to Alberta, we hated Trudeau Sr., and Trudeau Jr. would have heard that all the time. So yes, I think he has a deep, what's the word? A conditioning to not like Albertans, and he's shown evidence. He doesn't like coming here. He skips over us all the time. You said he likes surfing. I mean, he that's a good excuse to go to BC, but he never stops in Alberta, and he doesn't. He had that classic example of Happy Canada Day where he's from coast to coast to coast, and he's rhyming off all the provinces. I don't even think it was accidental. He skipped over Alberta. It's just not on his brain. So I agree with that. But back to what were you saying after that?
Yeah, well, I was saying that you brought something up in my mind, because we always talk about, in Canada, we kind of have this East-West dichotomy, right? And the West is kind of strange because Saskatchewan, Alberta,
you were talking about the economic drivers of the
that's
the
right.
Right. Okay.
So Saskatchewan, Alberta, we're generally on the same page. And then we have BC, which is like this as far left as you can possibly get in our country. And I'll tell you, I lived there for 30 years. They are very, very, very far left. And so we have this strange dynamic here in the West where Alberta and Saskatchewan are always kind of driving toward, especially with Trudeau, this independence. And then it's like kind of like BC knows that it's got to come along with us, but they're very reluctant, or they don't want to at all. And so we have this very weird dynamic in the West, but we produce, as you said, a disproportionate amount of wealth. So in my mind, I always wonder with Trudeau, like, yeah, you said, like, he deliberately skips over Alberta. He doesn't like Alberta at all. We have a storied, rivalry, if you want to call it that, with the Trudeau family. And so, but wouldn't it be in his interest to court the West, considering the amount of wealth that we generate?
Absolutely. That's what I was saying earlier. I mean, if he doesn't court us and he just leaves us alone, he'll win. And if he courted us a little bit, he'd have a huge victory. Like, why not come here and, and yeah, absolutely. That is that's been baffling me for 5-6 years. Why an animosity towards the West? Is it purely, is it in his case personal? Sure. Is it a long-term fact? Yeah, it's a long-term fact. I mean, for your viewers, right, who might not be 100% familiar with Confederation, I mean, Canada started out in 1867 with 4 eastern provinces coming together: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Quebec. And then over the next little while, Canada added PEI and Manitoba, and then added British Columbia. British Columbia was added in 4 years later, in 1871, because there was a vision that we would unite the East and the West Coast, and everything in the middle was just an afterthought. So Alberta and Saskatchewan were considered, we're the frontier, we're the rednecks, we're the providers of goods and services and labor, and we're not to be taken seriously. We don't have our fair share of seats. We don't have anything. So there is that cultural context. I mean, we're the last ones to join Confederation, and when we joined, we got a bum deal. And then there's still this collective thought out east that somehow or other they did us a favor by letting us join, and they're happy to take from us, but they're not giving anything in return. It's a really weird relationship. Like, Confederation is a really weird relationship.
Yeah, and in that, now, if you look at, Trudeau's preference for Eastern Canada, I saw an interview with him years ago where he basically says that Canada belongs to the French, that Canada belongs to Quebec,
that they have an inalienable right to rule the country.
Where does that come from?
That's almost what he said. He said it in I know the interview you're talking about. He's said things along those lines many, many times in his life. In that interview, I think he said that Canada is served better when there's a French prime minister, and that the socio-economic policies are dictated by the French, the Quebecers in particular. And in that interview, he literally talks about Harper, who is a Westerner by all standards, and how we were, where does that come from? That's snobism, or whatever you want to call it. It's the East having been here longer, having been in Confederation longer. There is a sentiment, if you travel the country, there is a sentiment that Alberta and Saskatchewan is sort of a frontier, and we're just hillbilly rednecks. That's it. And it suits the narrative. It suits everybody. I mean, I encounter it all the time. Like, I've traveled the whole country, and it's not it is anecdotal because it comes from me, but I've literally been on a plane where somebody said, they knew I was from Alberta. I'm flying to Montreal, and I'm talking carefully, letting them know, yeah, I'm from Alberta. Why are you on your way to Quebec? And I'm like, I'm an engineer. I didn't even say I'm a petroleum engineer. I'm just a mining engineer, something that's acceptable over there, coming to do some consulting. We're talking on the plane, and then we got on the whatever. At some point, I said, wouldn't Quebec benefit from buying from its neighbors, its brothers, its cousins? And that guy on the plane literally said, Alberta is an unfortunate circumstance of Confederation. It's like, holy shit, and not the first time I'd heard similar things. Not the first time.
But that's wild, considering all of the luxuries that people enjoy because of the wealth produced by the West. Like, that's always been what confuses me. Like, I can. There is a noticeable cultural difference between the East and the West, right? And I lived in Toronto for a year. That was as long as I could actually be there. I could not do a day longer than a year. And not to slam Toronto. Toronto is a great city, but culturally, it wasn't, the ends weren't meeting for me, culturally. And it's funny because when I lived in LA, I lived in a massive apartment building that was mostly people who were there illegally, right? People who were there acting and music and all that stuff. And but there were a considerable amount of Canadians. And the observations from the other people who are from, you know, either the United States or other places in the world, because I was Vancouver Jason, and then there was Chris from Calgary, and then so and so from Toronto, and so from Montreal, was the difference in personalities in dealing with, you know, Chris from Calgary and Jason, Vancouver Jason.
Yeah.
You know, we were much warmer, much more open, much more willing to talk to people, whereas the so and so from Toronto and so from Montreal were a little more closed off and a little less willing to socialize, right? And so you can kind of see that those the cultural differences, right? Like the West and the East are so culturally different. And my thing is that if Trudeau and you know, certain factions in the East truly do feel that way, then why not just let us go? Just let us go. You know, like,
Well, yeah, a couple of things. You know, try to do proper research on something like transfer payments in Canada. It's hard to find good information.
yeah.
And so and I experienced going into Quebec many times where Quebecers thought that they were contributing more to Canada than Alberta was. It'd be like, well, if that's the case, then let us go. But the politicians who know the truth, they don't say what's happening. A politician will never admit that Alberta pays disproportionately, or British Columbia or Saskatchewan, but they know it. But they know that if the country breaks apart and Alberta and Saskatchewan leave and British Columbia, that the rest of the country is in trouble. I mean, that's why suddenly the talk around, you know, the Alberta pension plan and the CPP will come. But, you know, we'll talk about that in a second. So the politicians know that Joe on the ground doesn't know. Joe on the ground doesn't know the importance of the economic contribution of Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia to Eastern Canada. They absolutely do not know. Now, I want to touch back on a point you brought up, which ties into everything we've been talking about. I think there's about 8 or 9 different cultures in Canada. You know what I mean? Like there's an East, you know, a Newfoundlander to me is as different from a British Columbian as a Torontonian. You know, you got Newfoundland, the Maritimes are very different. PEI is its own beast. Like, you know, you ever meet anybody from PEI outside of PEI? They don't leave. And if you trust me, if you show up in PEI, they'll spot you from a mile away. You walk around and you're not from PEI. Quebec's got its own culture. Even within Quebec, there's definitely 2 or 3 cultures, because big city Quebec versus rural Quebec are 2 different things. Ontario, the West, you know, and then talk about the culture in the North, Nunavut and the Yukon. And so Canada's got some very dramatic cultural regions like that are very different from one another. In fact, we don't have a lot in common. It's crazy. We don't have a lot in common.
We really don't. And that,
No.
I mean, even like, you know, BC and Alberta, we're right next to each other, and we couldn't be more diametrically opposed culturally, right? Now, so that I guess that brings me to the next question, or I want to actually before we do that, I want to go a little bit further into this World Economic Forum thing, because it's only recently that I found that people are willing to have this discussion. It seems like the rubber has met the road in terms of this World Economic Forum quote unquote conspiracy, right? Which it's really not, because I read the Great Reset. It was one of the worst reads of my life. It was brutal. Normally I would rip through a book like that in a day. It took me 3 months because it was such a brutal read. But they laid out in plain English exactly what the plan was, right? And I read it and I was absolutely horrified. It's basically a corporate brochure for a fascist communist dystopia, right?
It is garbage. I mean, you know, he talks about like the 4th and 5th industrial revolution, but he didn't create it. He's only talking about it. I mean, you know, if Henry Ford wrote a book like that, I'd be fascinated and I'd take it seriously, because Henry created the first revolution, and Benz and others before him. So yeah, I agree. It's garbage. And sorry to break your thought, but
no, I guess I'm going back to my original thought was that, you know, I hop back and forth between this is a real danger, this is extremely dangerous, and it kind of speaks to a lot of the counterintuitive things that Justin Trudeau does, right? Because if you don't know the World Economic Forum agenda, then none of what he does makes any sense. But if you understand their climate depopulation agenda, then it makes total sense as to what he's doing, right? And
when they're driving towards 15-minute cities and credit scores and getting away from hard currency and bartering and limiting movement, it all makes sense. I'm scared of it, but at the same time, I think it's a movement that has traction because of some individual. I think that when Klaus Schwab and George Soros behind the scene and some of the others pass away, I don't think it'll continue on. I think it'll fizzle out. I think it'll fizzle out.
I think, yeah, I mean, when I on my optimistic days, I think that the veil's been lifted and it's over. I think that it's common knowledge now. Like, but what does concern me is the language that they use, like they use population sustainability. Well, that's code for depopulation. It's totally. It's a new way of saying it, right? And that kind of lends to the Marxism aspect of it, because language games are always played in Marxism. And but on my more optimistic days, I really do feel like, yeah, everybody knows now, like it's all out there. And Jacinda Ardern stepped down to take her role at the UN or whatever she's doing. And like you said, Justin Trudeau is the only guy left. Now, this is my question to you. Why is he still hanging on?
Who?
Trudeau.
Oh, it's got to be money of some sort. I mean, there's something in it for him. He's been promised something. He because you're right. He doesn't even look like he's enjoying what he's doing on a normal day. He enjoys what he's doing today, where he gets to jump on the plane by himself, do a line of Coke in the back, drink some fine wine, and land in California and go talk about his socks. And then he gets his vacations and stuff like that. But being in the House of Commons and doing policy and stuff like that, why is he still doing it? I mean, he got hooked on it a little bit. The obvious, I think he's been promised something, but he got hooked on it. But he's also a narcissist, right? So he's a narcissist. He's a narcissist with, sociopath tendencies. And so a narcissist like him he's not self-aware. He doesn't do any introspection, and then he will continue until he destroys himself. I mean, yeah, there's so much going on there, but and I'm sure he has that battle of who, the family name, the legacy, the people that are paying him, enjoying it, not enjoying it. And at the end of the day, does his narcissism take over? I think his narcissism takes over all the time. He destroyed his family. He's destroying the country. He's going to destroy his legacy. His legacy is probably one of the things he cherishes the most, but he's so narcissistic that he's actually going to destroy his legacy. I mean, part of me right now wants him to hang on and stay in power a little bit longer and keep doing more damage, because damage, it's unfortunate, but we need damage to wake up people. That's the other part, right? Like you and I can talk about red pill, blue pill. I've been red pilled. Some guys are saying I need to be black pilled, and some people are still way out there, And on that thought, is the World Economic Forum still a threat? Absolutely, because look at what they managed to do, right? I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, hey, Marty, in 2021, do you think you'll be showing a passport to go eat at McDonald's? I would have said no. Well, it happened. And look at how easily it happened. I mean, and people still say, could it happen again? I'm like, absolutely, it's going to happen again. It was so easy. Like, people got vaccinated and took out their passports so they could go to freaking Starbucks. So if that's your moral high ground, if that's your if what's the word I'm looking for? If you'll sell your soul for a freaking latte at Starbucks, you'll sell it for just about anything else, right? Because that's and that's what you like. So when people ask me, am I scared of these things happening? Yeah, because I look around at my fellow humans, I'm like, man, you guys are easy to control, like really easy to control.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. Yeah. And, I don't know if you've heard, but they're introducing the digital ID in Europe. At least there's talks of they're going to begin rolling it out. Now, this is, and again, maybe this is naive optimism, but I feel like enough of this is common knowledge now that people aren't really going to adopt it. However, the point that you just made, I think is also correct. I never thought in a million years that Canadians would be so stupid as to accept a passport system to enter into a store or enter into a restaurant.
I went to a restaurant the other day with a friend, and the girl brings the card machine, and then he just rolled his watch on top of the machine, and then it went beep, right? So for him, the convenience is there. And I asked him, like, would you consider a microchip to make that easier? And he's like, absolutely. I'm like, holy shit. So
Oh,
you know, and the guy that I was talking to is a colleague, a fairly educated person who sees the convenience, for whom the convenience outweighs the long-term dangerous side effects. We see that all the time. I mean, you know, those are the kinds of warnings. Those warnings go unheeded. People don't listen to those warnings. Like, yeah.
yeah, but
I mean, it's a tweet I made the other day. Like, stop telling me it'll never happen, okay? Because people keep telling me that, oh, you know, in this case, I was talking about the confiscation of guns, because here in Canada, the government's in the process of confiscating guns. And I said, that's just another step in the agenda, because after they confiscate guns under the guise of climate change, they can confiscate your gas car or not renew your license. And then they can confiscate your two-stroke snowmobile or your two-stroke motorcycles, and they'll come after your extra pair of shoes, and they'll limit your traveling. And people go, that would never happen. I'm like, stop telling me it would never happen. Did you ever think that you would present a passport to go to McDonald's?
yeah.
Like, you know, it can happen. So yeah, now you got me spinning myself. Are we still on an evil agenda? Yeah, the evil agenda of the World Economic Forum is so easy to implement, brutally
Yeah.
easy. How many people are positive? How many people have you met in your day-to-day life go, oh, there's nothing wrong with a 15-minute city? It's a wonderful
Yeah.
idea. It's a
Well,
wonderful idea.
here's an observation I've had,
Yeah.
and you can tell me what you think about this. What I've observed is that the more academically, or I should say, university educated, college educated people, they've fallen for the ruse because they're used to being in academia, where there's one source of information. It's the ultimate source of information. There's no other information. Any other information is disinformation, right? And they've been trained to think that way. They've been and they've been trained to believe that they're smarter than everybody else. So everybody else is just all these blue collar Alberta crazies. They're all just conspiracy theorists, and I know the truth. Because I'm smarter, I'm able to disseminate information more efficiently, and the source of information where I get all my information from is the only correct source, is the only correct information. And previously that may have been true, but those sources have since been corrupted, as we saw with the vaccines and so on and so forth. And I think that's why these people are falling for it, because they don't understand that the where they're getting their information from has been totally corrupted.
Actually, it does. Yes, I agree that people in academia tend to follow other academics, but we also experience it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been told during COVID by lay person, call them whatever you want, by people who, you know, who would say, well, you're not an epidemiologist, so how can you talk about COVID? So the you know, preaching from a position of authority, people expect an authority to talk to them, and so that's deeply entrenched in our culture, and that's why I call myself a fact checker, because it happens at every segment of society. I mean, I get told shit. I get told, like, for your viewers, I'm an engineer, so yeah, I went through that academic system, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And then I even get people who say you should believe the science. I'm like, dude, my degree is a degree in science, and so then they'll further challenge and say, okay, well, you have a degree in science, but you don't have the degree in the right kind of science. They'll do whatever to discredit me on the basis of authority. So that's something I fight all the time.
You're right there. And I think you know, I think for the lay people who fell for it, I think they were more controlled by fear. I think one group were controlled by their own arrogance, right? Their own arrogance, where there was their downfall. And then there was another group where fear was their downfall. But you're right. And that's, again, on my more pessimistic days, I think, we're heading straight for the slaughter, because who's really going to fight back? Who's really going to question it? Are there enough people to say, no, I won't do this. No, I won't adopt this. Now, you know, there is a silver lining, or I guess a bit of hope on the horizon, because I don't think people of faith are going to go for something like a digital ID, or central bank digital currency, because it's way too close to the mark of the beast, way too close. Right. And so I think that that's going to be a saving grace in that respect.
Well, and so, one of the things, one group that's saving us right now is the rural people compared to the urban people. So rural people are more independent, closer to nature. You can't fool a rural person about climate change. That, the rural farmer experiences it and he can't be fooled. And again, the government's aware of that. The World Economic Forum's aware of that. And that is something that they're trying to, it's not a coincidence that they want to shove us into cities, because once we're all shoved into cities, we're easier to control, we're easier to manipulate, we become more dependent, and we lose that connection with common sense and reality and the real world. So and that brings us, that brings me to here in Alberta. I mean, one thing I love about living in Alberta is I live on acreage, man. I live out in the country, and my hobbies are being out in nature, and I hang out, thankfully, with people that have those skill sets that don't do necessarily the group think. So that is one of the battles I'll keep fighting. The rural urban battle in this country is a big one. It's the next one. It's a big battle.
So while we're on that subject, actually, I want to touch on that because farmers have now found themselves in the crosshairs of this World Economic Forum agenda,
on purpose,
right?
for a reason. Absolutely.
Of course. And of course, the cover is climate change, right? The amount of nitrogen that fertilizers are putting into the atmosphere, which is
the amount of water they use, everything. Farmers are bad now.
but it's crazy. See, first of all, the whole climate change narrative, it boggles my mind, because it's all based on elements that are necessary to our survival, right? Nitrogen, we're made of carbon, right? Carbon dioxide, we have to have carbon dioxide. Our planet doesn't exist without it. We need a lot of it, right? And so it's that's the part that always gets me, is that we're talking about these elements that are absolutely essential to our survival, right? But with the farmers, now the obvious reasoning behind going after the farmers is because they want to control the food supply, right? I think
the land, yeah, the food and the land. Yeah.
Can you go into that? Can you break that down?
In what sense?
Why are they going after farmers?
Because individual farmers are powerful people. I mean, an individual farmer who has, sections of land, a huge amount of land. He owns land. Owning land is one of the last few things you can truly own that's yours, that's of, there's no more land being created. So the farmer owns land, and the farmer makes food. And so that makes him and he's self-sustained, generally speaking. So he's just a very powerful, threatening individual to the government. I mean, it's the number one person that tyrants and the Marxists and the Leninists and the Pol Pots, all the evil people with socialist ideas throughout history, they go after the academics, like the teachers and the priests and the doctors and engineers. But who do they really go after? The farmers. Man. They go after the farmers and control if you control the farmers and the food production, everything else is secondary, because I can starve you to death. So, and you can control, taking away my access to the internet and things like that. Sure, it's annoying, but you take away my food, man, I'm at your mercy. Look at the massive, look at what the starvations that occurred intentionally in Russia and Ukraine and Poland over the centuries. So farmers are a key, go after the farmers, go after the mothers, right? Go after the fathers, go after everyone. I mean, they're going after everyone right now,
Yeah. No, it's
break up the farmers, break up the family. Like this has all been done, man. It's all been studied. It's been studied. Like it's predictable. Yeah.
That's, it's so, because as we're talking.
Yeah, sorry, Jason. I mean, I can take an envelope like this and I can write down the predictions for the next 10 years. And then I can open that envelope 10 years from now and guys will go, wow, you're brilliant. How did you know that? It's like, because I studied history.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I was just going there. Like when we were talking about farmers, I immediately was thinking about the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah.
I was thinking about was thinking about the kulaks in you know in the Soviet Union, of course,
Yep.
Mao's superpower program
Yep.
in China during the Great Leap Forward, right? Like this has been repeated time and time and time again throughout history. But for
Yep.
whatever reason, we just seem to allow it to happen because we don't have a knowledge of the
and
past.
and
We don't know what happened.
and the farmers, the farming is one of the easy one, is also one where we typically get ourselves out of that socialist communist hell world. So in Russia, for instance, you know, where communism did get pretty far, and then there was the food lines, and people were line, you know, the Russians controlled the food, but then little individually Russians got their hands on seeds, and wherever they could find a little plot, you know, grow tomatoes, grow a little bit of wheat, and then regain some control of their lives. And then capitalism kicks in, and then somebody says, how can I help you? I'll raise a chicken. But farming is one of those core industries that that gets us, that is ultimately capitalistic, and gets us out of trouble. So yeah, the government wants to control the farmers, man. They
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and it always goes the same way. I mean, millions of people starve to death as a result, and it always ends the same way.
I mean,
Always.
it's weirdly related to this, but you know, remember 3 years ago during COVID, like when they started doing lockdowns, and you know, they started shutting down essential, non-essential services. So a non-essential service would be, for instance, a bookstore. But then when
Mhm.
Costco, which sells food and books, you couldn't buy they'd isolate the book section at Costco. I remember walking through a Canadian Tire, and the section where they sold seeds and fertilizer was locked off. And it was our government deemed seeds and fertilizer non-essential during COVID. I'm like, holy shit. So wake up, people. Like, look around you. Your government is telling you that owning seeds is non-essential.
Mhm. Oh, yeah,
And who
absolutely.
thinks that that's right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So
It's
just so your people know, I don't know if you can see, but Marty is a farmer. this is this is seed. So at the end of the season, I collect seeds from my peas and my tomatoes and my cucumbers and my radishes, and I can buy them, but I make sure I have some. I'm a self-sufficient guy. I live out in the country, and I have mad skills, and the government doesn't like me because I have mad skills.
but that's and that's it, right? Like you're the real threat
Yep.
because they can't starve you, they can't bring you to your knees, right? And that's essentially why they went after the farmers in the first place, because exactly what you said, they're too independent. You
Yep.
can't control them through food supply, you can't control them through, I mean, maybe possibly fuel supply, but at the end of the day, farmers are industrious people, hunters are industrious people. They can feed themselves, and when it boils down to it, food and water are the absolute essentials. As long as you have those, you have life.
Take
And
away
so,
food, water, take away our guns so we can't hunt. Yeah, yeah, they're yeah. When you break it all down and you look at what's going on, man, it's nefarious. Like it's
but
really, really nasty.
but
And it's
that's
not done in our best interest. It's not done in our best interest.
no, not at all. And that's the thing with Trudeau is, you know, if you really look at everything that he's done and everything that he's doing, it's 100% to serve an agenda.
Yeah.
Now, with me, when I look at him, I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a guy who is just serving an agenda just to get it done and move on with his life and go and live happily ever after. You know, I don't think he really cares one way or the other, because he knows that no matter what happens, it's really not going to impact him or his children, right?
Yeah,
And
as long
so,
as he doesn't get whacked, he's happy. I mean,
exactly.
he's already accumulated 80 million bucks or so, they say, and I don't doubt it. He's got a nice little padded nest egg. He's good to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that brings me on to into the top to the topic of today. Alberta. Alberta.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
finally led us into the micro. So you and I are both in Alberta. I've been here for a year, could not be happier to be here. You've been here for decades. So I want to talk about Alberta sovereignty and what is currently happening here, because I feel like I've arrived at a very unique time in history in this province. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the Alberta independence, the independent spirit that lives here is as strong as it's ever been and growing stronger every day.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about macro independence and micro independence. So there's a micro independence spirit in Alberta. I mean, and in Saskatchewan and northern BC, northern Ontario, but here in Alberta is very strong. And by that I mean, um, we have a disproportionate number of citizens who have their own small businesses. We have farmers, we have loggers. The oil patch is an industry that lends itself to a lot of subcontractors. So drilling the well is a big business, but in order to drill the well, you need like 50 other services, and all other 50 services are single, sole proprietors. So at the micro level, we are independent minded. And that also manifests. That's historical. That's a cultural thing from farmers and loggers and whoever populated this country. And it manifests itself when you travel Alberta. You don't see government of Alberta signs everywhere. I mean, I've been out east. Like, you go to Montreal or Quebec City, it's like every 10th building has like government of Quebec on it. Government of Quebec, liquor stores, insurance, and stuff like that. So Alberta is independent minded at a micro level, and that's always been healthy. As long as I've been here, that's been healthy. But in the last 5-6 years, it's become independent at the macro level, at the provincial level, where the province has an independence sovereignty movement that's really gaining. I mean, it's really strong. The message that Alberta wants a fair deal in Confederation is extremely strong. Are people over the top wanting to separate? Not quite yet, but it's growing. And from talking to people who were here in the 1980s, when the last time that happened, after the Trudeau senior era, it's even stronger than then. So the willingness for Alberta to separate, or the separatist movement in Alberta, is stronger than it's ever been. And that's also because of events, but also of information. Albertans are waking up, learning about taxes, transfer payments, over contributing to all sorts of services. And I mean, I'll speak personally. I appear as a guy who's very political. I'm a typical Albertan. In 2000, up until 2014, I'd never talked about separation. I mean, I was independent, doing my own thing, working hard, ass, head down, ass up, they say. And I knew I was paying taxes, and they're going into the Ethernet, and they were disappearing, but I didn't care. But then in the last, 5-6 years, since 2015, there's been a lot of things that happen to make a guy like me wake up and others wake up. So, to your original question, the sovereignty, separatist, independent movement in Alberta is alive and well and very healthy right now.
So in your view, is it just the internet and access to information that's a driving force behind the increasing desire to separate?
Well, no, it took more than that. I mean, it's the existential threat by Ottawa. So Ottawa, if we just had the internet and Ottawa hadn't changed, a lot of people some would have woken up and said, hey, how come I'm not getting a fair deal? I'm paying too much in taxes. Mm-hmm. That would have happened. But what's really compounding the problem is Trudeau's damaging policies. I mean, Trudeau, Bill 69, Bill 49, they were bills that appeared targeted at Alberta specifically, to block pipelines. There's a tanker ban on the West Coast, but there isn't one on the East Coast. So that appeared to target Alberta. The Chancellor of Germany comes to Canada looking for an LNG deal, and he gets turned around, told there's no business case, and he gets sent away. The carbon tax in Alberta is extremely damaging, more damaging than in the other place. Trudeau wants us to go to a net zero power grid by 2030. It just goes on and on and on. The gun grab affects Albertans probably disproportionately more than it affects Ontarians. And so the Trudeau policies, the green revolution, we're gonna kill oil, we're gonna put caps on emissions, and we're gonna convert you to green jobs. Like, it's all very targeted. Look at what he just did recently, giving a tax break on the carbon tax to Atlantic Canada and voting down the same thing. So there was an awakening. There's always been Albertans who knew that we were getting a bum deal, but for most Albertans, that bum deal was something that they were willing to live with. I'm one of those guys. Yes, I pay a shit ton of money. I understood how transfer payments and the pension plan worked. But I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm fortunate. I live in Alberta. I got a nice house. My family's taken care of. Screw it. I don't care. It really changed for me when it became, when my government was, they weren't just giving me help and assisting me. They were hindering me and targeting me. I mean, I'm an Albertan. I feel targeted. Like all those things I rhymed off. Like Trudeau's policies are threatening to me. There's no other way to say it. He's a threat to me. So am I a separatist? I'm a full-blown diehard separatist.
Yeah, I am now too. Yeah, but I mean, I am for the West in general. I was when I was in BC.
Yeah.
Just knowing just the transfer payments alone, I was like, why are we doing this? This is pointless.
And let me say this because I get asked this question a lot. If Trudeau leaves tomorrow, because Trudeau is the worst thing in the planet, and people say, well, Poilievre will be just as bad as him. No, nobody can be as bad as him. It will slow down the damage, and it will buy Alberta, and it would buy me time. Just seeing Trudeau go would buy me time. But I highly doubt that somebody like Pierre or somebody else could come in and really change things. I mean, Trudeau brought so much awareness to the flaws of Confederation at this point that to me, the flaws of Confederation are unrepairable. They're unrepairable. Like no matter what, they're unrepairable.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, personally, I like Poilievre. I like what he has to say. Is he going to do a lot of what he says? I don't know. What agenda does he serve? Does he serve the same agenda as Trudeau? We'll have to wait and find out. But I agree.
Inevitably, because of the way we're structured, he will have to make concessions to the East. They outpopulate us. They just simply outpopulate us, and that's yeah.
But yeah, it's exactly what you just said. The real problem lies in our voting system, right? We have a first past the post system, which basically renders the West and Quebec and Ontario hold enough seats that they can form a majority government without anything from us.
Totally.
So that I mean, it just doesn't make sense. At least for myself, I've always looked at it like that. It just doesn't make sense for us to stick around because we're just going to keep getting the shit out of the stick. Now, sometimes it may work out in our favor. Sometimes we may get a prime minister who's who cares about the West, but it really doesn't matter.
No.
It like for us, we have no say whatsoever. So that said, Danielle Smith, she's our premier here in Alberta. She's probably the first political, or I should say, first Canadian politician I've been excited about in a really long time. Is she a response to Trudeau? Did conservatives vote her as leader, and then Alberta vote her as premier as a response to Trudeau and his policies?
No, she's in fact, she's lucky she got in, right? I mean, the vote here in Alberta was still pretty divided. Like for your viewers there, we just had an election in May and the vote was almost 50-50. And so the Conservatives got the majority, but barely, and that vote split was urban versus rural. So the rural vote here is or the urban vote is very much still a liberal socialist vote. So is that to answer, is Danielle a response to Trudeau? She is, but she's lucky she got in because there wasn't it could have easily gone to Notley. It could have easily gone to Notley.
Yeah, I should have phrased that as in as she represents conservatives. Is she the conservative response to Trudeau?
She's definitely the conservative response to Trudeau, but more simply, more pragmatically, she's an Albertan. We finally elected an Albertan who's doing what Albertans do. I mean, Kenny wasn't an Albertan. He can say he was an Albertan, but he hadn't been in Ontario for too long. Danielle is a libertarian, small business minded, small government minded person who is an Albertan who matches the Alberta culture and philosophy. And so she was lucky to get in. I don't think it'll be luck next time. She's going to demonstrate to all Albertans what Albertans are like. She's doing good work, and I think she could quite conceivably be a premier for 2-3 terms. So, but she is definitely a response to Trudeau, and she is definitely holding or standing up to Trudeau in a way that she's doing what she's supposed to do as an elected politician. I mean, she said it on the night of her election, of her win. she said, I only got elected by 50% of you, but I represent all of you. So yeah.
I saw that speech. I personally, I love the woman. I think she's tough, but she's smart.
She's smart. She's
smart.
Smart.
She's so smart.
She's smart. Yeah.
She knows the game that she's playing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's well aware of this whole World Economic Forum conspiracy that's going on. I mean, you may know something about this. I've read about this briefly, but apparently when she was elected, she purged some of the WEF elements from the Alberta Health Services. Am I correct, or am I?
Oh, she did that, and she purged a few elements. She just did a major purge last week, so she's still purging. But she also, she identified that we had certain contracts and obligations or agreements, and without necessarily canceling those agreements, she basically said we're not going to honor those agreements. So some in principle, we had agreements where we said we're going to do, follow the guidelines of, let's say, the WEF or the World Health Organization. She's like, I don't give a shit about the agreement. We're not following those guidelines. We're going to follow our own guidelines. So no, she's done a good job so far. The example is, you're right. She knows how the government apparatus works. I mean, she's been in government in one way, shape, or another for years. She was an MLA at one time before this. She's a journalist, a radio host, so she's interviewed a zillion people. She does like you and I are doing. She has these great dialogues with people, and you can tell she's listening to two sides of the story all the time. And right now I describe her as driving a brand new car, trying to figure out how much gas and how much brake, and figure out the controls. And she's moving an agenda. And the other thing that I like that she's doing, and thank God she's on our side, because she is actually a skilled manager and she can get things done.
Yeah.
Whereas that's one of the saving graces at the federal government. Sometimes Trudeau will announce something and I go, whatever. I don't give a shit. You're not smart enough to implement it. So, the gun grab's an example. On the surface, I should be scared shitless of the gun grab, but it's been 3 years, nothing's happened, and he extended it and nothing will ever happen. So thankfully Danielle's on our side because she knows how to make stuff happen. She's already passed a lot of laws quietly that are, hey man, I could praise her all day. I'm like you. I love her. I think she's doing a great job for the province.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're really watching two different approaches unfold, right? In Saskatchewan, you have Premier Scott Moe. For our American listeners, our premiers are our versions of governors, and Scott Moe is taking more of a blunt force trauma sort of approach. Basically, told Ottawa, "We're not collecting carbon taxes. Go fuck yourself." Is basically what he's told them, right? Yeah. Whereas Danielle Smith, she's way more slick in that she does it through legislation so that there's nothing that they can do. It's just it's cauterized. It's done.
She's very calculated too. Like I've talked to her, so I'll admit it. People say you work for Danielle. No, I do not work for Danielle. I'm not a spy for Danielle, but she has called me on occasion before she got elected more than now, and we would chat about with me, she would chat about energy policy because I had, I made it as very senior roles in Canadian oil and gas. And I know that she's making sure she's dotting the I's and crossing the T's, engaging properly so that at some point when she'll be able to truthfully say, I tried negotiating with Ottawa and it failed, and therefore I'm doing this. So she's doing the right thing. She's doing the right thing. Yeah.
So I guess we'll spend the last bit of our conversation on where we started, the CPP. So it has come to a lot of our attention, mine just recently as well, that the Canada Pension Plan is partnered with the World Economic Forum to manage the CPP investment portfolio. I don't know why that partnership exists. I don't understand it. But in Alberta, our Premier, Danielle Smith, has begun taking steps toward withdrawing Alberta from the Canada Pension Plan program. So can you just give us a brief overview on how CPP works and basically what it is exactly?
So CPP stands for the Canada Pension Plan, and it's a pension plan that was implemented in the 1960s by the federal government. And basically, anybody who works in Canada these days, 5%, 5.9, almost 6% of your salary is taken off as a deduction off your payroll and given to the Canada Pension Plan to manage on your behalf, up to a limit. So the limit is about $3,500 a year. So a Canadian who earns $60,000 a year in this country right now will pay $3,500 to the Canada Pension Plan, and your employer matches that. And then the Canada Pension Plan is collecting this money, acting as a separate entity, arm's length from the government, and managing all this money that they've collected from workers over the years. And then what they do is when that worker turns 65, through some really complicated formula, they pay a small pension to that worker. So in an example of a guy like me who's earned, let's say I've earned six figures for the last 20 years. I've contributed $3,500 year after year for the last 20 years. And when I retire at age 60, officially, when I can start pulling that pension will pay me about $800 a month. So it's pittance. It's almost nothing, but it is something. It was an attempt by the government to at least have something there for workers, because the government realized, and rightfully so, that people are lazy. If you just entirely depend on people to save for their future, some will, but the majority won't. So the government put in something in place. I don't know what the equivalent in the US is. Maybe it's social assistance or something, but it's a
Social
small
Security.
Social Security. So it's a small pension. And so over the years, 9 provinces have contributed, because right off the bat, when the CPP was founded, the province of Quebec said, no, we're not participating. So Quebec has their own QPP, the Quebec Pension Plan. So Quebecers have their own pension, and the other 9 provinces have the CPP. And Alberta now is talking. It's as if our chunk of the money there, we want to take it away from the Canada Pension Plan and create our own management agency. In fact, we could have our own management agency, or we could also say, listen, of the money that's there, we could turn back and let the managers of the Canada Pension Plan could manage our money for us. We could go to the street, get a bank. There's lots of options. Alberta is exploring all the options, but fundamentally, taking our money out of there and bringing it into Alberta so that it's under our direct control is a small step towards being more autonomous and independent from Ottawa. That's all it is at this point. It's two things. It's a small step to becoming more independent, but we also many think, the evidence is there that we over contribute to that pension plan, and we get less out of it. So, and the reason for that is because Alberta workers tend to be younger. The population's younger, and we earn more. So more Alberta workers max out their contribution every year than in Eastern Canada, and less of us pull a pension because we're all younger. So right now we're putting money into this fund that we won't need. Me as an example, I won't be able to access that money until 5 years from now when I retire. And in the meantime, lots of people out east are enjoying the money from that fund because they're retired early. So mathematically, it does appear that if we pull out, we will be able to give ourselves a bigger pension and contribute less to it, which is bad news for the rest of Canada. So that's what it is. And so those are the two motivators for creating our own pension. A, it's a step towards autonomy, and B, we think we'd get a better pension managed ourselves than we would pooling our money with the rest of Canada.
Yeah, so let's go with that. Let's explore that A option, because I feel like that might be, I mean, I think, well, A and B are both equal.
A is big. A is big, right? A is big.
Yeah.
I mean, look at there was immediately a stink. Immediately there was a stink. I mean, even Trudeau took the time to write an open letter to Danielle Smith saying this is a bad idea. He's never done that for anything else. So if Trudeau thinks it's a bad idea, guess what Marty thinks? Marty immediately thinks it's a freaking awesome idea, right? So if Trudeau's nervous about us pulling out, it's not because he's worried that it's bad for us. He's worried that it's bad for him and the rest of the country. So that's an indicator right there. And even if it never happens, just doing it right now and really pushing on this. I mean, Danielle got the studies done. She asked the chief actuary of Canada, we want to see what's our share of it, and what are the steps. So just initiating the discussion is already giving Danielle some leverage in other discussions. But I think deep down it is a real step towards, I think it'll happen. It might not happen this go around, but there's an effort to make it happen, because well, there's something else that has to happen. So if we have a Canada pension or an Alberta pension, we'll probably also have to have our own tax collection agency, because right now the federal government collects taxes on behalf of all the provinces except Quebec, and then gives it back to us. And we don't like that. So, these things are all called firewalls. So our own pension would require us to have our own tax collection agency, which is good. So instead of us having Ottawa collected and then us asking for it back, we're going to set ourselves up where we collect it and Ottawa will have to ask for it, and then we can dole it out. And it's in line with the other one we keep talking about in Alberta is our own police force, right? So these are the police force, tax collection, and the Alberta pension plan are three major steps towards a more sovereign Alberta. But in the short term, it gives us some real leveraging power against some of the policies from Ottawa. So
That's fucking brilliant. I didn't even know about I didn't know about the tax collection aspect of it, but that is absolutely brilliant. Like it's
the transfer payments would be a totally different thing now, because right now we send all our money and Ottawa gives us back. Ottawa gives us back money in three ways, right? They give us back, we send all our taxes to Ottawa. They collect our taxes on our behalf. Then they send us back equalization payments. We've never had equalization payments for 60 years, so we don't get any of those. Then they give us back transfer payments. So they pay us back money that we use for healthcare and education and stuff like that. And then they give us services like old age security, guaranteed income supplement, and employment insurance and whatnot. So if we start collecting our money ourselves, we'll just say, no, we don't need to send it to you for you to send it back and charge us an admin fee. No, we'll just keep it here and immediately apply it towards healthcare or whatever we want to apply it to.
Yeah, so, when you explain it like that, man.
And Danielle in her speech, when she's talking about that, she said it's very simple. She's like, we just want what Quebec has, because Quebec has all those things. Quebec has its own police force, its own pension plan, and its own tax agency. I did work in Quebec, and because I did work in Quebec, I had to set up and pay taxes in Quebec. And well, it goes further. I mean, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's totally brilliant.
Yeah, you just totally just broke my brain, because I didn't. Yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, and so for Americans and some Canadians too, because a lot of Canadians aren't aware of this, these equalization payments are basically a system that was set up under the Pierre Trudeau government, which took money from the wealthier parts of Canada, well, kind of pooled all the money together, and then everybody took a fair share. Is that am I
it redistributed the money so that everybody had the same level of services,
right? So it's national socialism, essentially, right?
Totally.
And so what we have here in Alberta is a scenario where, it's like me as a parent, right? I get my paycheck, and then I hand my paycheck over to my 6-year-old and say, okay, you decide how much the groceries are going to be, how much the heat bill is going to be. You decide how much gas is going to be. And then once all that's done, just send me what's left over. That's essentially what we're doing, right?
Well, and so you mentioned the brute force approach by Scott Moe. So Scott Moe said, I'm not going to collect the carbon tax and send it to you. That's fine. But man, he's going to be strong-armed by Ottawa, because Ottawa is going to say, well, we're collecting a whole shit ton of taxes from your citizen, and we're not going to give you your transfer payments for healthcare until you give us the money for the carbon tax. So Scott Moe is about to be strong-armed into oblivion, which is fine. He knows that, because he's picking a battle, and it just exposes it. But that battle, if that tactic doesn't work with Quebec, because Quebec collects its own taxes and then sends a pittance to Ottawa and then gets a shit ton back in transfer payments. I mean, so Alberta just wants what Quebec has.
So why does Quebec get this treatment?
They were smart enough to negotiate that right off the bat. That's all it is.
They just had the foresight. Yeah.
They had the foresight. They're better politicians than we are. They're politicians. They made themselves. They struck some good deals for themselves. And yeah, and what's amazing now is all the argument from fellow Albertans who are against an Alberta pension plan or against our own police force, and they'll use all sorts of mental gymnastics to say why they're against that. And that's why I'm glad to talk about it here, because I cannot think of too many negatives to controlling our own destiny, except that maybe we're taking a risk, and down the road, maybe there's strength in numbers, but I'm confident enough in our ability to do it on our own. I don't need the strength in numbers. I don't think there's strength in numbers. In fact, I really don't. I mean, sorry, people from New Brunswick, but I don't need your help.
So I want to pose this to you because I know you're a really smart guy, and I know you read a lot, and I know that you know history. So at the end of every empire, they all break apart into separate states, right? And in the United States, we're seeing a scenario where, we're starting to see Florida, Texas, different states kind of getting a little bit more, becoming more independent. In your mind, are we at the end of the American empire? And by American, I mean North American.
No. We're probably a couple of generations away from that.
Okay, because the reason I ask is because this is the first time in my lifetime where I actually think that we could realistically see an independent Alberta state and an independent Saskatchewan state.
Oh yeah, we'll see independent states, we'll see independent provinces, but it's not big enough to have a giant impact. Well, I could be wrong. I mean, there's a lot of people that say an independent Alberta would definitely cascade an independent Saskatchewan and an independent BC. So yeah, it could.
Here's what I think. I think Alberta leads the way. I think Saskatchewan falls in line, and I think BC isn't far behind because BC will be isolated. Alberta and Saskatchewan will need a major port, and BC is in the same boat as us, right? They don't want to send their money to Ottawa anymore either. No matter how how far left they go, at the end of the day, when you're sending billions and getting millions back, it's just not a good look. And so with this, I guess we'll cap with this because we've been talking for an hour and a half, and I'm sure you have other things to do. We'll
do this again, man. We'll kick off where we left off in a couple of weeks if you want.
This was such a great conversation. So to cap it, we're now in a situation where we're looking at an Alberta pension plan. You brought up the collecting our own taxes aspect, which I didn't even think about, which is it's just fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
So what's the next step after? I mean, if you're in Danielle Smith's head, where do you go from here?
No matter what, I would do the Alberta pension plan and the Alberta and the police force, no matter what, and then just keep using those things. A really positive outcome is that Danielle uses those things to start negotiating a fair agreement for Alberta, which might even lead to something transformational. We might negotiate more seats in Confederation, a better balance and things like that. She might be able to negotiate things that would actually help the country and protect the country and maybe save the country. So that's the upside. I mean, the downside is she does these things and it sets ourselves up for an independent country or more independence within Confederation. But on the upside, it wakes up the rest of Canada and people go, oh shit, let's fix the country, and let's Alberta's right in asking for a fairer deal, and let's give them the fairer deal, and in the process fixing things. So and I think if you talk to Danielle, she's not a separatist. She's not at that point. She's a libertarian who wants Alberta to have a fair deal, and right now she's doing it in a nice controlled fashion that could be very beneficial for the country. But it could flip easily. I mean, if Ottawa continues to, I have no doubt that if Ottawa continues to be totally 100% confrontational with us, no matter what she says, the on the ground Albertan will put so much pressure on her that independence would become something that happens. So I think she's playing a good role of keeping me calm as an example, and buying time. And if Trudeau's smart, he'll listen to her, and if he's an idiot, then he'll keep doing what he's doing, and the country will implode.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Last and final question. Last and final question. I just want to keep going forever, but last and final question. Digital IDs, central bank digital currencies introduced tomorrow. Does Danielle Smith stand between us and them?
Absolutely. Oh God, absolutely. Like she's on that front. She's a libertarian like none you've ever met, my friend. She's a libertarian. She's a small government, no interference, stay the fuck out of my life kind of gal. She has it tattooed on her arm. That's no, she does. So no, she's not. She's going to defend us from the World Economic Forum in Davos. Nobody on her, if somebody on her staff goes to Davos, and there will be, but it will be as an observer, know thy enemy, know what's going on. She's not going there as a disciple. If she goes there or sends somebody there, she's going to go as an observer to make sure she understands the threat. But she's our protector right now. Absolutely. We dodged a bullet. I'll say this to the viewers. We dodged a bullet. The NDP, Rachel Notley, were so 100% confident that they were going to get elected on May 29th, that they rehired people at Alberta Health and whatnot. And when they woke up the night of the election, I mean, I don't know if you were there, but the night of the election,
I was.
If the vote had been the other way around, the moment Rachel got 12%, if it was in favor of Rachel, all the medias would have said, hey, Rachel's the winner. But because even the media, everybody was caught off guard, and they were like, shit, they didn't want to declare Danielle the winner. She's at 60%. We can't declare it. 70% of the polls have come in. We can't declare it. It's like, Christ, in the past you guys would have declared it at 10%. So you were so stunned that you couldn't bring yourself to declare a victory to the Conservative, and we dodged a bullet. If Rachel Notley was in power right now, we'd be screwed. I'd be packing. I'd be thinking of packing.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Danielle is buying us a lot of time right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, on election day, on election day, I went to the church up here and cast my ballot, and I was just sick to my stomach all day. Yeah. Because we had just got here. I mean, we had only been here for a year, and I was saying to my wife, like, if the NDP wins Alberta, we got to get the fuck out of here. We can't stay here. Like,
the polls were 50-50 to the last minute, right? All day long, the polls were 50-50.
Oh my God, I know. Yeah. I was just sick to my side. I ended up going to bed without even looking at it, because I was like, well, whatever world I wake up in tomorrow, I'll deal with it. And I woke up in the morning and I looked. Danielle Smith wins. I couldn't believe it, and for our listeners who think that me and Martin are being, a little bit dramatic here, we're not. I mean, we are in a very crucial point in history in this country. And Danielle Smith, as Martin just explained, she is going to be a wall between us and the evil elements that are looking to do some very bad things. And Alberta, look, I'll tell you this. I know a lot of people who are coming to Alberta strictly because they feel like they're going to be safe from whatever's coming. And it gives me comfort because, and I know a lot of Albertans aren't too happy about all these people showing up from other places, but it gives me comfort because it tells me that all the fighters are together. Yep. That if it comes down to it and whatever, and I don't mean physical war or fighting. I mean, if it got there, yeah, but all of the people who are here seem, not all of us, but a lot of the people who are coming here seem to be on the same page, and we're all ready to join in this fight and protect ourselves from this, evil globalist agenda that seems to be swallowing the West.
It's our provincial motto, Fortis and Libre, strong and free, man. That's what we are, strong and free.
That's a beautiful way to end it. Let's end it there. Martin, where can everybody find you?
Martyupnorth, one word, on Twitter, or Martyupnorth on YouTube. Twitter is where it's full-blown politics, blood sport, if you want to see me there, and you might get offended. If you want to see the lighter side of Marty, the environmentalist, go look at my videos on YouTube, where I'll take you on amazing adventures out in the Rockies.
Yeah, no, I watched your channel. Oh, shoot. I watched your channel in preparation for this, and I was like, damn, man, I almost want to ask questions about the outdoors now. I was like, shit.
Well, we can do that on the next show. Absolutely.
We'll do that on the next one. Yeah. Well, listen, man, we're going to do this again very soon, because basically you just opened up a billion more questions. And by the way, I'll be the first to say you look fucking amazing for being 5 years away from 60. I'm looking at myself and I'm looking at
4
you.
years, man. I'm 56. Like I'm 56 and a half.
4 years away from retirement. I got more wrinkles than you do. So hang around after we're done recording, Marty. But thanks again for talking to me, man. It was awesome.
Cheers, everyone.